Did you know that there are only really 3 types of podcasts? In this episode, I'm going to be breaking exactly which ones there are and how they can better serve you as the host. And if you are a small business owner, which ones make the most sense to grow your business, deepen the relationship with your audience, and make you an authority online. In case we haven't met, hi, I'm Anna. I'm the founder of the podcast space. And as a former podcast producer, former journalist, current digital marketer, and also consultant for podcasters all over the world, I can tell you that using the right format for your podcast can make or break your show. I want to teach you better ways to podcast so you can have sustainable success and just making your podcast dreams come true. Let's dive in. So as a podcast host, it is your role to understand what you want from the podcast, right? In this podcast series, we've covered already a few things. Getting to know your why for podcasting, the types of episodes you should have, and of course, now understanding what is the format of these podcasts that you want to have. Now, there are 3 formats that you can use to deliver the podcast, and those are to educate the audience, to inspire, or entertain. For most small business owners, the majority of content that is going to convert leads into customers and help you become an authority online really is to educate your audience. Like the bulk of the episodes should be about this. Now, there is a lot of success in sharing inspirational stories, but normally those stories always have some sort of educational content. It isn't just talking about someone who is inspiring me, right? In terms of quotes, like I love talking about how quotes are powerful reminders of the impact that we can have with just a few words, right? I know people who changed their life when they read a quote. They said, wow, like this touched me so much. They inspire me to make a complete change. So understanding that, of course, you don't want to go into a podcast and just kind of like complain about things like nobody wants to be with a Debbie Downer and positivity is contagious. We want to make sure that we're combining these two. And something that I hear a lot is with podcasting becoming such a big thing, with YouTube, more creators are taking the space. I mean, over 2 billion users are using the platform today. There is a need for entertainment, right? Like people want to be educated, and there's even the term edutainment, right? Where you're taking the educational part and you're entertaining people, especially with social media. TikTok made big this type of content on everybody's lives, right? And so understanding that you can mix some of these together and have a successful show is key. Now, what I feel like most people struggle with is to pick the format that is actually working for them, because it's so easy to look around and see, okay, this format is super popular, then I should follow along. But I mean, if you are someone who by default, you are not a very humorous person or you like being to the point, sometimes the entertainment or storytelling is not going to be right for you, right? So I think it's important to understand where are you in your business and how you can provide what your audience needs. So making sure that you're one, serving yourself first because you're the one hosting the show. You want to make sure that you are providing content that is sustainable, but also understanding what is the need. I talk often about my client work and my client Lori, whose husband has had a series of strokes over Christmas Day in 2022, has completely changed her podcast. And we shifted from, the sharing inspirational stories of seniors and sharing educational resources about senior living into caregiving. And we really focused a lot more on, the journey as a caregiver. And I will make sure that I'm actually including the link to that episode. I'm just quickly going through which episode number it was, because I forgot to add that. And it is episode 36. So make sure that you check the show notes if you can't remember the number. But really remembering that your podcast can pivot, but sometimes as life happens, you may go down like a specific rabbit hole in your content, and just knowing if that's something that your audience will resonate with is super important to make sure that people are listening to the show all through the end of the episode. Like in making sure that as they're listening to episodes, they're thinking more and more, oh, this person is the right one for me, versus just like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for that, like moving on, right? So sometimes if you're not converting your listeners into customers is because you're leaning too much into the inspirational, into the know-how, but you're never talking about your products and services. And sometimes I'm guilty of this myself. I've been, getting more and more comfortable talking about like, hey, let's work together. Because the reality is, as you talk and more about your services and products, like we always feel like we're like pitching ourselves, but the reality is like, people need nudges, right? And so just releasing inspirational content is not going to get people to convert to customers. And so if the purpose of your podcast is exclusively to inspire people because you want your podcast to be a legacy, for instance, of your business or your brand, that's fine, right? If you want to create an inspirational deck of cards, that is actually something that is really, really cool to create as a product to get people inspired. And as women, for instance, like I feel like we love these fun merch opportunities, right? Like we look at something and like it would be great to have some fun elements like that. But determining what we want from it is super important. And on the entertainment scale, there's a few levels, right? There's a lot of podcasts, especially those that have signed on Spotify and Dear Media. Those tend to be more on the entertainment side, right? Like it's almost like celebrity style conversations. They're almost like, listening in and tuning into your best friend, having a chat with someone else. Like those are really, really popular. But just understanding that a lot of these episodes are super popular because it's almost like quote unquote like gossip is almost like the big brother. And so if you aren't a small business owner and you just want to record chats with people, one of the key things that you need to remember is that the podcast needs to be able to be relatable. So while, for instance, a huge mistake that I see is people talking about, let's say you want to talk business with a friend and you're talking about things that happen. There's a really important balance to strike where there's one, you're talking about like a joke that becomes like an insider joke, and just talking too much in like almost like code language and people have no context for what you're talking about. That is normally one of the main reasons why podcasts don't land, is because there's not enough. You're not painting us a picture about like this person you're talking about. And if you're talking in code, but you never really like took the time to ever break who this person is to us, we feel like we're not part of the group, right? So there's like a little bit of work. It's not just like turning on the mic and talking about, random stuff and it will be a success. Like there is a part to entertaining that is really about making the listener feel like they understand every single part of the journey of what they're listening in. Now, I sometimes notice that, again, the most fun interviews that I had were when, the guest and I had a little bit of a fun moment. We were having, talking, obviously podcasting and sharing our expertise, but like things were a little loose, right? Like on the sense that maybe we messed up and we kept that in place. Like that is a little bit of an entertainment part that I think it's fun to include. But where is the relatability part in these moments? Is it the too much of a personal take on this thing? Or is there a value for the listener? And there are some really good ones, like confessions of like crazy stories in business. Like that is the takeaway, right? Like everybody has crazy stories. Everybody has worked with someone in an office or in business. And again, mixing the entertainment, something that is relatable to everybody, that everybody feels like, oh yeah, like that happened to me too, with sometimes like the lessons in that. It's such a powerful way to connect with people. But again, also knowing that I feel like it's important to say that in this type of episodes, the educational, the inspirational, and the entertainment podcasts, it's really important to determine what is this podcast going to be doing for you? So if it's building your authority, you have the freedom to do these three. But if you're trying to grow your business, you really want to focus on the educational with a sprinkle of inspiration, because that is what can help people navigate the problem that they have with you being the solution. So just think about what is the overarching theme of my podcast. Why do I want to create this? And listening to episode 52 will give you a really clear direction of like the why of the podcast, but associating the purpose long term is super, super key to make sure that this podcast is sustainable. And the best way, if you've been trying to figure out like what works for you, I think that it's a great way to look into your social media and your podcast analytics. So see the types of posts that maybe in short format really resonated with people and bring a lot of that to your podcast audiences. Even though not all your audience will convert into podcast listeners, it's, a pretty good understanding of what resonates with the audience that you have pre-built. So instead of guessing, just look at those analytics. What were the posts that in the last 90 days people engaged with the most? People that send you most messages? People that, if you release a newsletter, that people really got excited about and message you more than any other topic. And so that's why it's important to track performance and which episodes worked well, but also what type of episodes got me the most responses that are aligned with the goal that I set for the podcast. So I hope this provided a little bit of more context on why podcasts are successful. And I know that there's a strong inclination for podcasters to look at really successful shows, Diary of a CEO, School of Greatness, looking at those podcasts and say, oh, I want to create that podcast. But the really important thing to be aware of is that these people, before they launched these super popular podcasts, these were already successful business owners. They already had a pre-built audience, and they came with this amount of years in, knowledge of this industry, or have a roster of really famous people. So when you're thinking about creating a podcast that meets some of these categories, it's so important to know that just because a successful show draws a big audience, it doesn't mean necessarily that it will make sense for you in the stage where you're at. You can, of course, work toward that, but have that understanding that it's a completely different machine. I have friends who launched podcasts that were super interesting, absolutely not about the topic of their expertise, not at all monetized by, directing the business back to themselves, but actually they created successful podcasts because they had another podcast before, and everything that they've learned on that journey created that very successful second podcast. So just want to remind you that sometimes success that quote unquote cannot be explained comes from a background of other things. And I think that this year is something that I'm going to be devoting so much time is breaking down stereotypes, because this podcast is ethical. And I feel that a lot of the things that I don't say are a lot of misconceptions within the podcast industry that I'm not saying that I'm breaking dreams here, but I think that it's super important to go at it, understanding the context of what make that podcast successful. And if you want to go down that route, how long does that take to make that happen? And just understanding that it's possible, but it just requires a different approach than just releasing content weekly, right? So this podcast was one of those that I did a little more off the cuff to help you start, rebrand, or improve the podcast that you already have. So next episode is all going to be about the hosting styles that you can choose to have on your podcast that's going to make you hone in your expertise, have more fun, and connect deeper to your audience. I've been Anna Xavier. Everything that I mentioned on this episode will be in the show notes, so make sure you visit those. And to work with me, you can find all of the information at thepodcastspace.com. And I can't wait to hear your ahas. Just keep creating content that's imperfect but moves you forward.